Invisible mechanisms are a challenge for us. The most obvious of them are gravity and magnetism. Their effects are tangible to us, but their mechanisms are not. When I talk about mechanisms, I'm essentially referring to the chain of causes and effects that explain a phenomenon. So when apples fall from trees, we can observe that they do so reliably and consistently. We can measure the behavior of falling objects and use those observations to predict the behavior of future falling objects, and this proves to be very useful. But this power of prediction only tells us what is going to happen, not why or how it happens. Gravity especially is problematic. With magnetic fields, we can detect the lines of force. If we bring the right conditions and ingredients together, we can cause them to be generated. Not so with gravity. We can predict the apple will fall, but we can't detect any lines of force between the apple and the earth. It's really the ultimate in invisible mechanisms. Newtonian understanding depicted gravity as an attractive force, but that defies the law of conservation of energy. Force costs energy, but the effect of gravity remains constant despite the lack of any energy expenditure. Einstein suggested that space and time are reshaped by the presence of matter. I believe he described this as the happiest thought he ever had. And it did provide an impressively elegant explanation for why the moon might orbit the Earth without any energy expenditure being required. But the concept of space-time is one of these theories that potentially solves one mystery only by bringing multiple new mysteries into being, chief of which is, what is the mechanism, the chain of cause and effect, by which matter warps the shape of two inherently shapeless things? Ever since Einstein, we have been thinking of time and space as substantive entities in their own rights. Time and space are seen as being present in some way or other. Time and space are seen as being substances, a fabric that can be compressed by the presence of matter. The concept of space-time as an actual substance that can be affected by the presence of other substances is a direct attempt to identify physical mechanisms of behavior that can explain gravity, and the baby is thrown out with the bathwater. For the theory to hold together, both time and space are turned into physical objects. That right there, that is the extent to which our cognitive bias takes us. If only physical things are real, then even space and time must be physical. Is it madness or is it genius? That's a relatively meaningless question. It's a cognitive bias. Is it correct or is it incorrect? It's demonstrably incorrect, just as Aristotle's definition of maths is. Both space and time are nothing more than principles of maths observed in action. It is a principle of maths that one moment, one iteration follows another. Our observation of that principle in action is literally all that time is. Honest. Time doesn't have any atoms or subatomic particles of its own that could conceivably be compressed by the presence of other collections of atoms. It is also a principle of maths that if one value moves closer to another, then the relative distance between the two decreases. Our observation of that principle in action is literally all that space is. Honest. Space has no atoms or subatomic particles of its own that could conceivably be compressed by the presence of other collections of atoms. We have become so used to overcomplicating our thinking that some concepts are so simple that they almost hurt. It is true that space is entirely filled with stuff, but the stuff with which space is filled is not space. It is true that there is stuff present at every moment in time, but the stuff that is present is not time. Time and space are principles of maths observed in action, and if your own maths seems to say different, I'm suggesting it's because you've either missed something that is there or added something that isn't there. So what is gravity then, for heaven's sake? I read an alternative theory of gravity about 16 years ago. The promotional blurb for the book promised me a version of gravity that I would be able to envisage in my mind's eye, and it was that very promise of enabling me to see an invisible mechanism that immediately made me want to read it. And reading the theory did initially get me all kinds of excited, because it did indeed live up to its promise and gave me a way to look at gravity in which the actual mechanisms were transparent to me. I was profoundly affected by that, but there had to be a but. When it came to explaining the causes of these transparent mechanisms in a way that was equally transparent, the theory failed. I tried hard to get it to make sense to me, but ultimately I had to put it on the shelf to gather dust as an interesting oddity from an outsider theorist. Here's what happened. The first part of the theory, the part that I liked, was outlandish as all get out, but I didn't mind that in the least as long as it made sense. It's known as expansion theory, and it goes like this. According to expansion theory, all atoms are in a perpetual and constant state of expansion. All of them. Don't worry about the why of it for a moment, and we'll come to that. Because all atoms expand at the same constant rate, they remain the same size relative to each other, even while they are continuously expanding. So, I am bigger now than I was a few moments ago, but so is everything else, so everything seems to be remaining the same size. With me so far? Okay, so how does this cause gravity? Well, if you have two bodies floating side by side in space, and one is the size of a planet and one is the size of a human being, and they are both expanding at a rate of approximately 1/1,000,000th per second. They are effectively expanding towards each other through space. When the planet and the human come into contact, the planet's expansion pushes the human through space at a constant rate of acceleration, and so the human finds themselves pressed against the surface of the planet. The human's sensation of personal weight at this point is the sensation of their own inertia resisting the acceleration of the planet. I told you, it's an outlandish theory. But it's also extremely elegant. Is it as elegant as space-time? Well, it could be very easy for us to think of Einstein in terms of the genius capable of elegance of thought, and McCutcheon as the crank-outsider theorist capable of embarrassing himself. But McCutcheon's theory, so far, is by far the more elegant. What do I mean by elegant? I mean it fulfills itself with pure simplicity. I mean it honours Occam's razor. Space-time doesn't. Space-time is an inspired and wistful fancy that we all fell in love with. Within our current explanation for gravity, there is a thing known as the equivalence principle. This basically states that the effect of gravity is equivalent to the effect of acceleration. There are plenty of videos on YouTube by respected scientists who explain that if you step off the roof of a building, from the point of view of physics, you effectively become weightless, and that what happens next can better be described as the ground coming rushing up to meet you, rather than you being pulled down to the earth. So what does this remind us of? Well, mathematicians have always been struck by the uncanny way in which maths matches reality. It's this very phenomenon that captivated thinkers like Plato and Newton in the first place. The reason that seems uncanny is because maths is actually so good at matching reality that if we didn't know better, we would almost say that maths writes reality. That's just how good of a match for reality maths is. It's uncanny. It's a mysterious coincidence. It's verging on spooky. And gosh, we wonder what is really right in existence. From here we can say the same for the equivalence principle. It is so good at matching the effect of gravity that if we didn't know better, we would almost say that the equivalence principle actually is gravity. Spooky. But of course, we know better. What exactly is this information that we know is better? It's our old friend, cognitive bias. In the case of maths writing reality, it is our cognitive bias that the physical is the only thing that qualifies as existing at all. So obviously maths matching reality perfectly is just some kind of cosmic coincidence. Do we actually know this? Well, not exactly, but well, it's obvious, isn't it? That's what a cognitive bias is. The world is obviously flat. Just look at it. In the case of gravity, it is our cognitive bias that physical matter is clearly not expanding because surely we would have noticed if it was. Of course, the clues that the world is round were always there in the movement of the sun across the sky, but it took a significant cognitive leap to really put two and two together. With gravity, the clue that matter is in a constant state of expansion has always been there in the way that if you step off a building, the ground comes rushing up to meet you. But it takes a particular cognitive leap to really put two and two together. So in reading about expansion theory, I had a theory that showed me with breathtaking simplicity how an apple could fall to the ground without anything detectable at all going on between them. It even explains why two objects fall to Earth at the same speed regardless of their relative differences in mass. So, the outlandishness of the idea aside, I was perfectly happy to be excited by this expansion theory idea. What I needed next from Mark McCutcheon was an equally transparent mechanism for the atomic expansion that the theory was centered on. And that was where the whole thing broke down for me. I couldn't understand McCutcheon's explanation for what was causing atoms to expand in the first place. It seemed to revolve around the sentence, why should we expect space inside an atom to be the same as space outside an atom? And I tried to get the sense of what he was saying and at some point just had to give up. Just like Einstein, McCutcheon doesn't get that space is not a thing in and of itself. I was really disappointed actually. But that whole experience had crystallized for me my desire to see in my mind's eye the chain of cause and effect in a system, even when that chain is effectively invisible. So what is gravity, for heaven's sake? So, sometime last year I had the light bulb moment of deciding to look at numbers three-dimensionally. And I saw that a simple iterational sequence of one moment to the next, unavoidably creates an expanding sphere as it iterates. Each iteration is larger than the one before and contains everything that has gone before within it. I very quickly remembered McCutcheon's expansion theory and the lack of a mechanism to support the expansion of atoms. And here was my own theory suddenly showing me how the values of the simplest of all sequences, the counting of one moment to the next, naturally and endlessly expand across iterations. So I was ready to jump back on board immediately, because I remembered how much I had enjoyed the feeling that expansion theory had given me in the first place. To be able to picture an invisible mechanism, ever so enticing to me. But. Another but. Yeah, I could feel the moon, the weight of it, hanging in the air above my head, and it was saying, "No, I'm not coming down. If I was going to come down, I would have by now. But your expansion theory does nothing to make me. I'm a huge ball of rock in the sky. What's keeping me up here? You've got nothing." I was stumped. McCutcheon did offer an explanation for orbits, but it was just as awful as both Newton's and Einstein's efforts. I'm sure both of those men were geniuses, but they're still allowed to be incorrect from time to time. I wrote an email to an outsider mathematician who I had been reading online. He said that his best guess for gravity was expansion theory, and his best guess for orbits was the electromagnetic fields of both the Earth and the Moon being in repulsion to each other. I like that very much. It gives me a huge new problem, which I'll get into next. But let me first just emphasize why I like this model so much. This is the first time I have had it suggested to me that what keeps the moon up in the sky is something different from what keeps me held to the ground. The whole story of this video seems to be littered with huge, glaring things that somehow managed to go unnoted. Did Newton incorporate orbits into his theory of gravity because they naturally emerged from his theory, or more because he felt he had to? Face it, how can you release your theory explaining that gravity is due to all matter exerting attracting forces on all matter, when out the window there's a huge rock floating in the sky? So yeah, two diametrically opposed phenomena, why don't we entertain the possibility of two distinct causes? Despite being widely regarded as geniuses, neither Einstein or Newton considered this, as far as I'm aware. But then hardly anybody has. One invisible mechanism feels tricky enough without having to deal with two. So, now I have a new dual action theory to try on for size. All existence is iterational. Each iteration of existence is larger than the previous and contains all of the previous iterations within itself. This causes all existence to be in a perpetual state of expansion, which produces the effect of gravity. At the scale of celestial bodies, such as moons, planets, and stars, the electromagnetic fields of these bodies act in repulsion to each other. As a mechanism to explain an orbit, this is the best I have ever taken for a test run in my mind's eye. Picture it in your own mind's eye. The Earth and the Moon expanding towards each other through space. But because their electromagnetic fields are in repulsion to each other, when their expansion draws them near to each other, the two bodies literally and naturally roll around each other in space, unable to kiss because their electromagnetic fields won't let them, but unable to part because they are forever expanding towards each other. And with expansion theory, I now have one half of this dual action invisible mechanism in my mind. Oh happy day, I have the mechanism for gravity. Now, to complete the picture, I just need to understand the invisible mechanism of an electromagnetic field. I didn't want to do magnetism. I didn't want to research it. I didn't want to take it on at all. It felt beyond me. But it's one of the fundamental invisible mechanisms in physics, so I didn't have much of a choice. So let me share my best guesses with you in as concise a way as I can manage, and that will just have to do for now. I need to lay 3 items of groundwork first, so try to be patient with me. 1. My research. Mainstream physics does not provide explanations, only observations of the behaviour of physical phenomena that lead to predictions of future behaviour of physical phenomena. So when I'm searching the internet for insights into magnetism, I naturally gravitate to outsider theorists. In the case of magnetism, Theoria Apophasis is my man. That's obviously not his name, but I don't know what his name is, so I'll call him Theo. Theo is a quirky character, and I like him very much. He has a tendency to go full-on Rick Sanchez on occasion when he's describing his insights into magnetism, but I actually quite enjoy that. He also tends to repeat himself over and over again, but he's wrestling with the issues of language use, just like the rest of us, so I don't hold that against him. I encourage you to watch at least some of his videos on magnetism, links in the description below. 2. Say hello to the ether. The ether is the hypothetical medium that fills the space between any instances of the presence of matter. It's an ancient and medieval concept and was seen back in the day as a gaseous phenomenon like air. Mainstream science seems to have an ambiguous relationship with it. I propose that there is an ether, but it is not gaseous and it cannot be detected directly, only indirectly, via the behaviour of physical phenomena that can be detected directly and which would not be possible without an ether of some form or other. Why do I propose this? There are 2 main reasons. A. I have already identified that absolute nothing cannot exist anywhere at any time. For absolute nothing to exist, it would have to exist everywhere at all times. Therefore, every location that exists contains some form of existence or other. There can be no such thing as an absolute vacuum. B. Maths is infinitely scalable. Therefore, existence, which is determined by maths, must also be infinitely scalable. In other words, there is no limit to how large or small existence is. Now, this second point flies in the face of our mainstream understanding of physics. There is a principle in physics known as the Planck constant, which says that there is a scale of smallness beyond which the concept of measuring size becomes meaningless. This is understood to represent a natural and unbreakable limit on smallness in the universe. I propose that the Planck constant does not mean a hard limit on how small existence can be. I propose that the Planck constant is a scaling constant that sets a hard limit on how small existence can be and still be potentially observable by an observer at our scale. I'm saying that if it were possible to shrink a human observer down to the scale of the Planck constant, then that human would then be subject to the Planck constant as calculated from their new scale. So basically, all I'm saying here is that there is a limit for us on how small a thing can be and still be observable or detectable by us. But if we shrank ourselves and our sensory perceptions down in size significantly, that limit would shrink with us. This proposed principle is hugely significant, and I'll be coming back to it later on. Number 3, the unified field. I've already explained that I don't see how a unified field could be anything other than a boundless and infinitely scalable ocean of values that are all positioning and repositioning themselves continuously in response to the relative qualities and positions of their neighbouring values. The ether, in my view, is those parts of the unified field that exist at a scale that is so small and fine relative to us that it cannot be directly detected or experienced by us. But we can deduce its presence because things such as light and magnetism and radio waves, which we are able to detect, would not be possible without it. We also know it is there because logically it simply can't not be. I describe the unified field as an ocean of values because it is three-dimensional and seamless, two essential properties. But there's a difference between the ether and water or gas. Imagine you're underwater right now. When you move your hand, it pushes through the water and the water has to move out of its way. Now take away the water and move your hand through the air. Even now, when your hand pushes through the air has to move out of the way. The ether, I propose, is existence at such a fine scale that it does not have to move out of the way of my hand. It is as unaware of the presence of my hand as my hand is unaware of its presence, because their respective scales are simply too far removed from each other for them to see each other. The ether and my hand pass through each other, and neither gets out of the way for the other. So, now, with all of that being said, let's take a look at a magnetic field. Here we have an image of cross-section of the typical kind of magnetic field as produced by a typical human-made north-south magnet. When we look down at this field from above, we get something like this. According to Theo, these white lines represent the centrifugal divergence of force in motion, while the black lines represent the centripetal convergence of loss of inertia. So we have force moving outwards from the centre, while loss of inertia is moving in towards the centre. Now, I know the language I'm using right now will be like a brick wall for many people. I'm really just walking you through the language I have had to walk through to arrive at the conclusions I'll be arriving at. My aim, as much as anything, is to help us penetrate the language use. The lines that are centrifugal inherently become centripetal when they cross the equator of the torus and start circling back to the centre. So if lines of force in motion are moving outwards above the equator, they must be moving inwards below the equator. If you take a stack of magnets and separate them in the middle, you get two magnets that, to all intents and purposes, are identical. Their magnetic fields are in alignment, they are pointing in the same direction. So if the north of this field has divergent lines of force, the south of this field must have convergent lines of force. Bring them together and the divergent and convergent lines of force dovetail, pulling the central nodal points of the two fields together. If we separate the stack again, but then invert the lower stack and try to bring them together, we have lines of force that push against each other instead of pulling towards each other, keeping their central nodal points apart. So that mechanism of attraction and repulsion feels clear enough to me. But what are the mechanisms that underlie all of this? Why and how is a magnetic field brought into being, and how does all of this relate to the ether? Well, I am, and I admit it, in the land of pure speculation now, and all I can speak in is broad principles. The unified field is an ocean of values that are in a continual state of change because the behaviour and quality of each and every definable value is directly influenced by the behaviours and qualities of its immediate neighbours. If a whole bunch of similar values that wish to push each other away are pressed against each other into a space that does not allow them to push each other away, then they will spin and vibrate and generally be agitated. They are in repulsion to one another for one reason, but held in fixed proximity to each other for another. In such a situation, it may be expected that coherent, cyclical patterns emerge. The agitation of the atoms within a magnet sends out alternating lines of force and loss of inertia through the ether surrounding the magnet. Because the ether does not register on my scale of perception, I can hold a magnet and not feel anything going on at all. The lines of force coiling around a magnet are moving through a medium much finer than air. Rather than refer to that medium as the ether, it feels simpler to me to simply call it the unified field. But it is the field at a scale that both approaches and surpasses the Planck constant in terms of tininess. And in order for this fine-scale coil of force and loss of inertia to do any of its famous attracting or repelling, it needs to come into contact with another part of the field that is similarly fine-scale, a field that can see it, so to speak, feel it and be affected by it. If I'm correct with this model of gravity and orbits, then for the planets of the solar system to be positioned at such varying distances from the Sun means that their magnetic fields must be significantly different from each other. Thanks to Einstein, we have this notion that we call space-time, which is often referred to as a kind of fabric of the universe. There's no such thing as space-time. It's the ether. It's the unified field at a very fine scale. The spatial dimensions have no properties, and time is an effect of the iterational nature of existence. Effects attributed to Einstein's curved space-time, such as gravitational lensing, should look to be attributed to magnetic fields and the ether. And I think I should probably stop there. I didn't want to do magnetism, and now I feel I could go on and on about it, but that's enough for right now. And so, there you have it, how gravity and orbits fit into the proof of nothing. Yes, the idea of expansion theory is outlandish. I kind of feel like I should apologise, because I know what it's like to have a cognitive bias that tells me things are solid and stay the same. But things are not solid and they don't stay the same. They just follow rules, the rules of mathematical truths. Expansion theory may feel like too huge a cognitive leap for us to make, but that's not because it really is such an outlandish notion. It feels like a huge cognitive leap because it's the prevailing cognitive bias that is actually outlandish. We may feel that something like expansion theory changes the world too much for us to take it seriously. It doesn't change the world. The world has been doing this every moment of our lives since always. The planet is pushing us through space. We just didn't realise it, and that's okay. The progress of human understanding is nothing but a series of cognitive leaps, and the constant expansion of existence is simply the next cognitive leap that we can either entertain seriously enough to test now, or leave for another generation further down the line to test. It's entirely up to us. In part 6, I'll give you the 4 most foundational mechanisms of existence, and we'll see what kind of model of life, the universe, and everything emerges from it. Back in Up an Atom's video, she talked of how the various disciplines of the sciences can be seen as branches of the same tree. For example, the study of particles is foundational to physics. Physics is foundational to chemistry, and chemistry is foundational to biology, and biology is foundational to consciousness, and so forth. This desire to establish the science tree, along with its foundation, is the desire to identify the chains of cause and effect that lead to our experience of existence as we know it. So, I am about to present to you my recipe for existence in a diagram. Before I do that, I just want to warn you that I will be using a circle within a triangle within a larger circle. And this results in a diagram that you could feel resembles the eye in the pyramid, that symbol which is so loved and reviled by conspiracy theorists as the symbol of the controlling class of human society. So I will just state once, here and now, that I am not a shill for a shadowy organisation, and I do not want to start a cult or religion. I'm just allowed to use triangles. That is all. So are you. So is anybody. So let's get into it. The first circle contains the primary foundational mechanism of existence. 1. Logicism. Correct mathematics is objective truth, the foundation of existence. Objective truth states that there can be no such thing as absolute nothing. Therefore, existence must exist, always. Let's pause here a moment and make an important distinction. This fundamental truth does not explain how we can get something from nothing, which is the existential question we are asking when we say, where did we come from? Or how did the universe begin? The thing is that when we have something so foundational as what is objective and what is subjective back to front, the line of questioning that flows from that back to front premise will also be back to front. The question that this primary mechanism answers is not how can something come from nothing, but rather how can something, i.e. anything, become nothing? And the answer is that it can't. Existence never came into being. It has simply never been allowed to not exist, and it never will. In this way, the primary mechanism is commensurate with the famous law of conservation of energy. Existence can neither be brought into being or destroyed, it can only change form. So the primary mechanism doesn't cause existence to exist, but rather prevents it from not existing, and it does so forever. This is a valuable distinction for us to make, because it helps us to understand how difficult philosophical investigation can be when language use, born of erroneous cognitive bias, can lead us to asking the exact opposite of what we need to be asking. Okay, time for the evil triangle. The primary mechanism is foundational to the three mechanisms that follow, and which I will place in this triangle. Up here we have mechanism number 2. There can be no existence without 3 infinitely scalable spatial dimensions. So remember, this mechanism doesn't cause the spatial dimensions to exist, it prevents them from not existing. Now note how I have taken care to include the phrase infinitely scalable. The truths of maths determine the behaviour of existence, and the truths of maths are infinitely scalable. Therefore, existence itself is infinitely scalable. If the Planck constant says otherwise, then in trying to understand the Planck constant, we have simply missed something. This is extremely significant, and we will be exploring it more. Mechanism 3. There can be no spatial dimensions without the presence of subjective quality. The essence of this mechanism is that it introduces relativity into the existential mix. You cannot have spatial dimensions without relativity. One location in 3D space can only exist relative to all of the other locations in 3D space. If a location does not exist relative to all other locations, then it does not exist at all. And that is not allowed by our primary mechanism. The quality of one location in 3D space is defined and determined in relation to the qualities of all other locations. Relativity is subjectivity. This location in space is only here because this location is here, and this one is here, and this one is here, and so on. But what is the quality of this location? Is it high or low, hot or cold, bright or dark, sweet or bitter? The question of quality can only be answered subjectively, relatively. This location is high from this location's point of view, and it is low from this location's point of view. Explaining that a location's highness or lowness is relative to where it is being observed from is exactly the same as saying it is subjective. Relativity equals subjectivity. You cannot have 3 dimensions without them being entirely filled with subjective or relative quality. And again, this mechanism doesn't cause subjective quality to exist. It prevents subjective quality from not existing. And this brings us inevitably to our 4th foundational mechanism of existence. You can probably guess it. If you haven't guessed it already, you could pause the video now and take a few moments. I tell you what, I'll put up the first part of it and leave the last bit blank for a few moments. The 4th mechanism. You cannot have subjective quality without... Pause the video now if you'd like to think about this for a moment. And I will give the answer in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You cannot have subjective quality without consciousness. I know, I've gone and done it now. Consciousness is foundational to existence. Great. But is it really that much of a surprise? Did you not suspect we were going to arrive at this point sooner or later? Our current cognitive bias is that biology is foundational to consciousness. It's not. It's the other way round. But as usual, our problem can be said to lie with language use. I say the word consciousness, and then you think you know what I'm talking about. How does the water know which way to flow? When the question is asked like that, it sounds like I'm committing the great and terrible sin of woo-woo. Heaven forbid. You think I'm anthropomorphizing the water, attributing human characteristics to something that is not human. In truth, it is we that anthropomorphize consciousness. We are so bedazzled by our own human flavour of consciousness that we can barely conceive of any other flavour. We can get into a debate about whether animals other than humans are conscious. They clearly are. And we can go from there to asking if all living entities, such as plants and mushrooms and bacteria, are conscious. And maybe that would be a longer debate. At some point, we would have to start getting precise about just what we mean when we use the word conscious. So what do we mean by it? As usual, the consciousness mystery has remained a mystery to us for so long, not because it is too complex for us to work out, but because we struggle to think simply enough. Previously, I asserted that all qualities must have at least 3 dimensions, 3 sub-qualities, just as the quality of colour does. What then are the 3 sub-qualities of consciousness? Awareness, which is sensing, memory, which comes from time, choice, which comes from uncertainty. What makes me say this? Awareness. There can be no consciousness without it. Another word for awareness is sensing. In order to be conscious, we need to be conscious of something. Without the ability to sense those things that are internal and external to us, there can be no consciousness, because we could perceive nothing to be conscious of. Can you see the self-evidence of that? Memory. There can be no consciousness without it. If each moment was completely unaware of the previous moment, existence wouldn't know what to do. It wouldn't know how to behave from one moment to the next. It wouldn't know what to think of this current moment because there would be no memory of any previous moments to compare it to. Can you see the self-evidence of that? Choice. There can be no consciousness without it. Now this felt like a subtle one to me at first, but it's really as simple as the other 2. If you remember what has happened, and you are aware of what is happening, but you do not have any decision-making capability, then you are not capable of thinking, you are not conscious, you are simply happening. You have no agency, no will, no subjective opinions, no ability to respond, no say in anything whatsoever. Consciousness is sensing things, remembering that you have sensed them, and then deciding what you think about it all and what you're going to do. Can you see the self-evidence of that? So what are the mechanisms that facilitate these 3 sub-qualities of awareness, memory, and choice? Let's take a look at a simple physical interaction and look for signs of consciousness in it. Here is a rubber ball I filmed bouncing on a tabletop. How is this ball aware of its internal and external conditions? When I described awareness, I said, without the ability to sense those things that are internal and external to us, there can be no consciousness, because we could perceive nothing to be conscious of. In the case of this rubber ball, its own internal sensory apparatus are the atoms and molecules it is made from. When the ball makes contact with the tabletop, these molecules are compressed between the inertia of the tabletop and the ball's own acceleration. The compression of the molecules inside the ball is how the ball senses it has hit the table. The compression of the ball's own molecules tells the ball, you've hit something that isn't moving out of the way, and the ball's behavior will now change accordingly. Okay, so that's sensing. What about memory? If we take a random frame from this piece of footage, we can see a single moment in time of the ball's behavior. Question: which way is the ball going to move in the next shot? Maybe it's going to move downwards towards the table. Or maybe the ball is on its way back up. It's possible the ball is just arriving at the top of a bounce. Maybe it will pause where it is for another moment before falling again. We can't be sure which direction this ball is going to move in the next moment, because we don't know where it was in the previous moment. But the ball knows where it's going, because the ball remembers where it was in the previous frame and what direction and speed it was travelling. See? We didn't have enough information to know where the ball was going to move, but the ball itself knew where it was going because it did know where it had been. The ball's speed and trajectory over time are, mechanistically speaking, the ball's memory of its own movement. Any scientists or philosophers watching this, I invite you especially to ponder that sentence deeply. And finally, choice. What choices does this ball have about anything at all? Well, in this particular situation, not too much as far as I can tell. My rubber ball analogy of consciousness may have reached its limit on this question. For the moment, if I'm going to start unpacking the mechanism of choice, it's better for you if I start thinking like a human again. Choice is an intrinsic component of consciousness. But what can be the mechanism for choice in a universe where all behaviour is dictated to absolute perfection by objective truths? The question doesn't make sense, does it? This is one of the biggest existential questions. Do we have free will? How can there even be choices to choose between if existence is absolutely determined? And this part needs a bit of extra time and space. Consciousness is a system by which one value assesses its own qualities by measuring them against the qualities of its neighbouring values and vice versa. This is the iterational unified field which we would so much love to understand. All of this is the field, including myself and yourself, your immediate surroundings, and just every bloody thing else. There is literally nothing that is not this field, not even a thought. The problem we have is that there is too much of the field for us to comprehend it all at the same time. We have this problem because the field itself has this problem. It's all to do with the phrase I took care to include in Mechanism 2. 3 spatial dimensions must exist, and they can only be infinitely scalable. Here is the thing. Here is what explains all behaviour. Any and every given value in the unified field is a system of smaller values, and we can take absolutely any discrete quantity of the field and treat it as a value. So if we take me, for example, and you can apply this to yourself naturally. I'm a coherent value. We have one man in our immediate field of consciousness. We are one man away from 0 men. If I am the value in question, the infinite scalability of existence insists that I consist of infinite smaller values. I do not get a choice about it, and my opinion about it makes no difference. And sure enough, at my own scale, it is very easy indeed to identify that I consist of many smaller values. I got my hands, I got my arms, I got my legs, I got my nervous system and blood cells, and so on. We know it. We can see it. We can feel it. We can work it out and make sense of it. And with suitably powerful microscopes, we can take it further and say, I got my atoms, I got my subatomic particles. Yet there is a limit to how far we can see, and this limit is to do with scale. It doesn't matter whether we are talking about using telescopes to see very large objects very far away, or microscopes to see very small objects that are right in front of us. Any and every given value is a system that has its own natural scale, and any given system can only relate to those values of the field surrounding it that are of a commensurate scale. Once a value becomes too small and fast, or too large and slow, we simply cannot be aware of its presence, because the apparatus that we have as part of our own sensory systems are not at a scale that can see finely enough or grossly enough to make sense of it. This is what the Planck constant really tells us. The Planck constant works in pure maths and tells us that beyond a certain scale of smallness, relative to us, the concept of measurement ceases to have meaning. What this really means is that the maths itself, which we use to measure things, is too coarse-grained to make sense of anything beyond the Planck constant. In other words, the unified field cannot perceive itself, cannot know itself fully. Despite the Planck constant, I assert that maths, and therefore existence, is infinitely scalable. But to be able to perceive and measure something smaller than the Planck constant, I would need to be shrunk down to something approaching or surpassing it. Then my own internal sensory apparatus, my own internal maths, would be within range, so to speak. The infinite scalability of existence plus the Planck constant, when understood as a scaling constant, guarantees uncertainty in a perfectly written universe. Can you see? That is where the necessity for choice is satisfied, which allows for consciousness and free will. And that is perhaps the most beautiful saving grace an eternal existence could ever give itself. Think about that when you have some time. This rubber ball is a simpler system of consciousness relative to me. There is less uncertainty present in it, therefore, relative to me, it has less free will. From my point of view, this rubber ball has less free will than I do. Maybe. This field I am standing in is a system, and it has its own apparatus, which are the smaller values this field is made from, for sensing itself and its immediate surroundings. Different fields have wildly varying sensory apparatus. Different insects, different plants, different soils, different temperatures. So every field sees the world differently. This blade of grass is a system, and it has its own apparatus for sensing itself and its surroundings. This volume of air between my hands is a system, and it has its own apparatus for sensing itself and its surroundings. The water in the stream we looked at, wherever that water is now, any subatomic particle that we may have found, can only be a system that has its own apparatus for sensing itself and its surroundings. That's all that consciousness is. And all of existence is stuck with it. Mathematics writes all of the behaviour of existence, but each bit of existence can only ever read itself subjectively from its own point of view. Existence cannot read all of itself, cannot make sense of itself completely. We talk of sense of self, of ego, of the human condition, of that experience that we are forever separate no matter how much talk of connection we hear. Yes, a human being is a discrete and complex system of consciousness within the greater unified field, which itself is entirely conscious at all scales. A human being's personal sense of isolation is that sense of separateness that every discrete system of consciousness has, because every discrete system of consciousness can only see so far and can only ever occupy its own location. And that's me, standing in this field right now. I can only experience so much of it, so much of myself. And it is this field itself, and these blades of grass, and this volume of air, and all of the atoms that are buzzing away right now. We are all systems made out of smaller systems, and in turn, I am a smaller system within infinite larger systems. I'm a member of my family. I'm currently a part of this field. I'm a resident of Scotland. I'm a British citizen. I'm European. I'm a member of the human race. I live in the solar system, which is part of the Milky Way. Blah, 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 and so on. The further from us in scale the other parts of the system, the field, become, the less able we are to understand them. But those connections do influence us directly. The effect of the wheeling cosmos around us is big and slow and steady, to the point where it doesn't feel like it is affecting us at all. Yet it enables our existence as we know it, not to mention the possibility of a meteor wiping us out in a blink. Anything you perceive, you are connected to, and that connection is as real as anything ever. The reason this diagram is so helpful is because it provides a structure of existence that allows us to see that which we cannot hope to see through a microscope or a telescope. The interscalar problem means that we cannot know everything. This iterational, unified field, right here, of which we are a part, is too big. It's also too small. It's too fast, and it's too slow. It's too much of everything. So we make the sane choice of accepting that we can't comprehend everything. The maths just gets beyond us, to infinity and beyond us. And that's okay. Beyond a certain point, we can't know what the higher truths of higher maths are, because they operate at scales that are too far removed from ours. But we can look to the foundational truths for reliable knowledge, and we can know that those truths apply to both the greater cosmic scales and the smaller quantum scales, just as much as they do to us. The foundational truths are in effect at all times in all situations, even when the higher truths are causing us to feel mystified. So understanding the foundational truths should be of help in any situation. So let's take another look at this thing. There are several reasons why it's cool to have a triangle in one's diagram, whether you are evil or benign. One of the reasons in this case is that the shorthand symbol for therefore is 3 dots making a triangle. This diagram reads from the center, and therefore comes at just the right moment. Existence, which is written by mathematical truth, must exist because absolute nothing cannot. There can be no existence without 3 spatial dimensions, infinitely scalable. There can be no spatial dimensions without subjective quality. There can be no subjective quality without consciousness. Therefore, the unified field in perpetual iteration. Physics, chemistry, biology, picking your nose, they all occur out here. And like the lines of force of an electromagnetic field, when existence gets tired and falls towards nothingness, these foundational truths refuse it entry or exit, and existence just has to loop around for another pass in a new and hopefully improved form. That's the importance of the torus, the donut. I'm not out to start a cult so that I can get you to give me your money and have sex with me. You should be so lucky. And so, I hereby give this diagram, along with the definitions and axioms of proof of nothing, into the public domain. There will be a link in the description to download an expanded version of this image that summarizes proof of nothing. Please feel free to make it into t-shirts, posters, bookmarks, whatever you like, and feel free to keep all of the profits for yourself, unless you especially wish to send me a cut, in which case you can feel free to do that too. But I would like to see people making money from printing and distributing this, because I would like to see as many people as possible becoming familiar with it. This diagram right here is the answer to that great catch-all existential question, what's going on? This is what's going on, all the time, at every scale. It's self-evident in all of nature and in all human-made things as well. In the next part, I will tell you the meaning of life. I am now, before your very eyes, going to build a 3-dimensional model of the very foundational quality of existence itself. All of the necessary ingredients for existence will be present and correct in their simplest possible forms, and they will each be in correct relationship with each other, which is exactly what is required of a foundational quality of existence. This quality of existence is the answer to the existential question, what is reality made of? It is the most fundamental and fundamentally simple foundational quality from which can emerge the infinitely complex qualities that we experience as reality. This is analogous to finding and identifying the primary subatomic particle, if such a thing were to exist. So here we go. Let's build the foundational quality of existence. To begin with, I pull up the basic core structure of any given quality, which I explored in the colour sphere. The colour sphere shows how the 3 required dimensions of any given quality relate to each other. One dimension will be the axle. This runs from one side of the sphere to the other, passing through the centre in a straight line. This dimension defines the quality's extremities, which, in the case of colour, are black and white. One dimension will be the spoke. This runs from the centre of the sphere to the outer. This dimension defines the quality's intensity, which, in the case of colour, means saturation. How much of the specific quality in question is present. And one dimension will be the wheel. This rotates around the axle. This dimension defines the quality's spectrum, which, in the case of colour, is the full range of possible hues. If the trick to understanding any given quality is in identifying its three dimensions, what can be the three dimensions of the quality of existence itself, the simplest, purest, most foundational quality, from which all of the infinite and complex qualities of existence must emerge for existence even to function? Here comes the technical language. In scientific terms, they are space, inertia, acceleration, and force movement. In mathematical terms, they are number locations, division multiplication, and addition subtraction. What we have here is an illustration of how the maths and the science are literally the same thing. It is not that maths matches science. Maths is reality, and science is the study of reality. The wheel dimension, the quality's spectrum, is the spatial dimension, which gives us the three-dimensional space we inhabit and provides maths with locations for all possible numbers in existence. But both reality and maths need to iterate in order to obey their own rules, their own absolute and objective truths. They both need this because they are the same thing. In scientific terms, we need some opposing or balancing forces. In mathematical terms, we need some mathematical operations. If we don't have these things, then we can only be left with an inert space filled to the brim with inert numbers. The remaining two axes, the spoke and the axle, give us the four basic and foundational mathematical operations that have to be present at the foundation for existence to have a chance of working. The scientific term inertia is the mathematical operation of division. The scientific term acceleration is the mathematical operation of multiplication. The scientific term force is the mathematical operation of addition, and the scientific term movement is the mathematical operation of subtraction. Theo asserts passionately that Mother Nature is simplex in nature. She only understands two things, he says: inertia acceleration and force movement. Inertia and acceleration are inversions of each other, just as division and multiplication are inversions of each other. They represent two poles of one dimension. Force and movement, scientifically speaking, are inversions of each other, just as addition and subtraction are inversions of each other. They are two poles of the same dimension. Theo calls the interactions of inertia, acceleration, force and movement pressure mediation. For Theo, pressure mediation is all that is going on in nature at all times. I believe him. But pressure mediation of what is what we want to know. the pressure mediation of inertia, acceleration, force and movement is the answer. And when we are then drawn to ask questions like, but the inertia of what? The acceleration of what? The answer can only ever be the inertia or acceleration of whatever quality it is that we are asking about. In this case, we're asking about the foundational quality of existence. So the inertia here is the inertia of the quality of existence itself. And likewise with acceleration, force and movement. Existence is made out of the relative qualities of all of its own values. Maths insists on three-dimensional space and the relative values that that space must literally, by definition, be entirely filled with, and which can only iterate, interaction after interaction. Absolute truths apply at all scales, all levels, at all times, so they apply just as much to a human being as they do to an atom or a cosmos. And so, here we are, iterating away. And this is what it just happens to feel like and look like for us right this moment. But this is what is happening right now and all the time. What is foundational to existence? Space within which values can exist, along with mechanisms to ensure those values show relative behaviour toward each other. This model of the foundational quality of existence includes everything a growing reality needs. The maths are absolute and unbreakable, as powerful a source as one could ever wish for. The space is infinite and infinitely scalable. The mathematical operations are accounted for, which is actually a huge revelation to me that has only come to me since I made part 6. And what those operations actually feel like to us is right there also. This right here, if you have ever gone in search of the fundamental particle of existence only to be foiled in your attempts, this is analogous to you finding your fundamental particle. It sustains itself just as clearly and cleanly as my square roots of negative numbers, just as the colour sphere contains the locations of every potential colour. Within this quality of existence sphere can be found the locations of every potential quality of existence. And look, they're even colour-coded. So the foundational theory of existence presented here in the Proof Trilogy enables us to understand why and how we are experiencing existence as we are, with gravity as it is, and the passage of time being what it is, and the infinite scalability of all space causing all sorts of relativistic effects. But of what practical help is that for a typical layman type of human being who just wants to get the most out of day-to-day life? One would hope that the foundational theory of existence would answer all foundational existential questions such as who am I, why am I here, and what is the meaning of life? So let's get into the meaning of life territory. Well, it's all about coherency. Any part of the unified field, any part of existence as we perceive it, can be taken and treated as a value. But some values are more coherent than others. What do I mean by coherent? We take the universal axioms presented in the Proof Trilogy, and we understand that they apply to all levels of existence in all ways. But how does that really help the viewer watching this? By knowing what governs all values, the great and the small, we get to know what motivates all values and why. And that is hugely helpful information for anybody living in and having to deal with the living unified field on a daily basis. And having it sets us heading into the meaning of life territory. What is the meaning of life? What is the motivating factor that results in literally all behaviour and phenomena? If all values are conscious to some relative degree or other, what is it that all values are eternally seeking, be they raindrop or nation? The meaning of life, the motivating impulse of all existence, is the movement towards optimal coherency. Optimal coherency? I know. We were hoping for something a bit more romantic sounding. But just as the word logicism is just a word that means something very simple, understandable, and easy to appreciate, so too is the phrase optimal coherency, just a term that means something very simple, understandable, and easy to appreciate. In the same way that logicism simply means that which is true just because it can't not be true, optimal coherency refers to that which you most deeply long for. Optimal coherency is that which every single value most deeply longs for. Coherency, according to my definition, is a measurement of the harmonic stability or intensity or strength of a system. All coherent systems must be harmonic in some way. The changing of the values within a coherent system in response to each other and the surrounding environment must create cyclic patterns, sequential patterns, if they are to continue to exist over time. For example, the turning of day into night, back into day, is a stable and harmonic system caused by the rotation of the planet as it orbits the sun. While the turning of winter into spring, into summer, into autumn, and back into winter is a stable and harmonic system caused by the angle of the planet's axis in relation to its orbit around the sun. The changing of day into night and the turning of the seasons are, from our point of view, very stable and harmonic systems. They have a high level of coherency. They go on and they go on. And any smaller systems that are held within the context of those relatively great and reliable systems of day and night and the changing of the seasons must by necessity be harmonic with the changing of day into night and the turning of the seasons, if they are to be stable themselves. Put very simply, harmonic stability is what feels good to a value, absolutely any given value. How can I make such statements with such confidence? Simple. Because it is self-evident in all of existence. Harmonic stability is very easy to detect. It is the conscious nature of all systems to inherently be seeking optimal coherency, optimal harmony from one moment to the next, because incoherency equates to instability, discordancy, discomfort, pain, noise, confusion, lack of agency, vulnerability, fear, suffering, and so forth. While coherency equates to stability, harmony, comfort, pleasure, music, clarity, increased agency, confidence, appreciation, joy, and so forth. Examples. An inefficient machine will make noise, while an efficient machine, a more coherent system, will produce a tone, if it makes any sound at all. You can tell when you are driving a car if you are in the optimal gear by the sound and vibration the car produces. Clearly defined patterns that can coexist are the hallmark of a harmonically coherent system, while white noise, static, and random discordancy are hallmarks of low coherency. Coherent systems are based on oscillation, vibration, an ongoing back and forth. Day turns to night and back again. The seasons cycle. We breathe in and we breathe out. Our hearts contract and then relax. We go to sleep and we wake up. We exert ourselves and then we rest. We eat and we excrete. We speak and we also listen. If we are coherent. It's all about vibration, oscillation, back and forth, feedback loops. If there is no vibration, no oscillation, no feedback loop, then there is no continuation, no stability. If you breathe out but do not breathe in again, your body will not continue and will soon cease to be coherent as your body. The moon only has a coherent orbit because it repeats. If the moon only circled the Earth once and then flew off into space, there would be no coherent moon orbit to speak of, and things on this planet would look very different indeed. And the same is doubly true of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. If the subatomic particles of our atoms did not oscillate as they do, then physical phenomena itself would lose coherency and cease. An athlete who doesn't exercise their body repeatedly will be a very low coherency athlete. We can take any coherent system and analyze it for its harmonic patterns, knowing that there absolutely must be harmonic patterns there in the first place for the system in question to be a coherent system at all. The motivation of existence, all of it, is towards increased harmonic coherency, for the simple reason that disharmony, incoherency, hurts and ultimately fails to propagate. This is why we have a finely tuned universe, because existence itself is in a perpetual process of tuning itself. Each and every value in all of existence only wishes to feel better rather than worse. It truly is as simple as that. But for any value in existence to become harmonically coherent, it must be harmonically coherent with the surrounding region of existence. Taken at the human scale of complexity, this is a subtle and challenging prospect. How shall any given human individual be optimally coherent, optimally harmonic with all of the various aspects of a human life? How shall they have an optimally coherent relationship with the health of their body, with their family, with their community, with their planet, and all of the other life forms on it? How shall they have optimal coherency with themselves as well as with others? This is an ongoing challenge for all levels of existence. In a relative existence, neighbouring systems of comparative size and coherency amount to neighbouring life forms. Are you, as an individual, coherent enough to yourself for other individuals to become coherent to you? This is a fundamental, foundational, existential question for any value in existence to consider. The long yearned for optimal coherency of any given value, which basically amounts to heaven for that value, can only be achieved through that value becoming harmonically coherent to both its inner state and its external environment. That is the goal of every value in existence ever. And all it really means is that we all just wish to feel better rather than worse. Does this remind you of anything? It should remind you of everything. This is objective truth. It is how everything works. There are higher maths, higher mysteries, that are higher simply because they are beyond our current ability to calculate. But this description of the nature and motivation of existence applies just as absolutely to those higher maths as they do to us. The unified field exists and can't stop existing. It is conscious and can't stop being conscious. It is self-sensory and can't not be self-sensory. That's just how it is, because the objective truths of maths decree it. And the unified field doesn't especially wish to spend eternity suffering. No single value does. So you have some systems in nature that devour other systems in the search for optimal coherency, while other systems work in symbiotic relationships in the search for optimal coherency, while others are utterly oblivious to each other. And along the way, what feels worth remembering is remembered. The human being devours other systems in the quest for optimal coherency, and it works in symbiotic relationships, and it is also highly oblivious to many, many other systems. Almost all of them, if you do the math. As a result of this, the planet is currently dying. The human race is not currently optimally coherent, not to itself, and not with its environment. But this is the motivating impulse that guides evolution and nature. Every single value in existence is seeking optimal coherency. What am I? Where am I? What's going on here? What can I do to feel better about all this rather than worse? Atoms have that motivation, earthworms and cows, and so did Gandhi, and so did Hitler. And so do you, and so do I. That's how it is with the living field. All of it. And all of this shows us how to understand and relate to the living field. And that is immeasurably valuable. And so, here we are together, you and I, in each other's fields. You want to get symbiotic with me? Or you want to devour me? I know. You'd rather just be oblivious, eh? I don't blame you. An example that illustrates the significance of coherency is light. If you shine a 5-watt bulb on your skin, you're not going to be burned. You won't even feel it. But a 5-watt laser will burn right through your skin. The difference between light from a 5-watt bulb and light from a 5-watt laser is not power or energy, but coherency. The light in the laser beam is tightly focused. This shows us that optimal coherency of any given value is not necessarily the highest coherency. It is the coherency that is neither too high nor too low, but just right for harmonizing with the other coherences involved. So an athlete should not train too much nor too little, but just the right amount to achieve optimal coherency. We should do nothing too much nor too little, but only just the right amount to achieve optimal coherency. And that optimal coherency cannot only be on our own individual terms. If optimal coherency on our own terms does not take into account what is optimally coherent for the living field around us, then it is simply not optimal coherency. My describing the meaning of life as the movement of all values towards optimal coherency may not sound so enticing to you. To understand the statement, you really need to understand that the term optimal coherency translates to an individual human as pure heaven. That is what this rather cold-sounding scientific term means in human experiential terms, pure heaven. And pure heaven for one individual will look different to pure heaven for another individual. But if the coherences of two related individuals really are optimal, then they will, by definition, be optimally harmonic with each other. Values are values because the nature of all values is to evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. They evaluate themselves against all surrounding values, and all surrounding values against each other and themselves. How big am I? How small am I? How hot am I? How cold am I? What am I feeling now? What am I perceiving now? What might be happening that I'm not perceiving right now? What am I thinking now? What am I doing now? What is going on? Human processes of evaluation will be more complex than some others and less complex than some others. This is to be expected whenever infinite scalability is part of the equation, and it always is. If as a human individual you desire optimal coherency, and you definitely do, then becoming optimally coherent to yourself and with your surroundings is what will bring that for you. And it is the only thing that brings that to you, because it is the thing that is being brought. Understanding this is the most valuable thing any living value can possibly understand. So we have the meaning of life in rather cold-sounding scientific terms. How do we translate that scientific understanding to something practicable in human experiential terms? As always, it is very, very simple. We humans, as a collective species, have been seeking optimal coherency ever since we were humans. We seek it in the fields of politics, economy, industry, science, religion, all of the arenas of human activity. If we wish to identify the aspect of human society that will, if transformed correctly, most efficiently and effectively bring us optimal coherency, we need to identify the aspect which is foundational to all of the others, foundational to politics, economy, industry, etc. The aspect of human society from which emerge politics, economy, industry, etc. The foundational aspect of human society, which informs and shapes all other human endeavours, is culture. The field is family. There's no getting around it. For the longest time, I didn't understand the word culture. So many people use it with such vigour and passion, and I didn't get what all the fuss was about. I think maybe I just blanket equated it with tribalism, which I also had very shallow views on at the time. Now I see clearly why people focus on it so much, because culture is simply one's blueprint of personal values, and that makes it foundational. Culture is as infinitely varied as any quality, and a beautiful thing that is. Here are the values we believe in, and here's how we express them. But any and every living culture that wishes to be vibrant and strong and coherent in the world, once it is aware of how existence works, that culture understands that its entire joy of living is dependent on a coherent relationship with the field, with all things that it observes, anything and everything. This understanding leads to one simple adjustment to one's personal culture, and this applies to the culture of an individual, a family, a community, a business, a government, a group of random strangers waiting for a train, rich or poor, young or old. This one cultural imperative becomes primary for all of us. It simply becomes our default response to existence, because, hey, that's just what people from our culture do. And if we want to be competitive with each other, here is the place where it's most appropriate. The core cultural imperative that promotes optimal coherency for all values, pure heaven, and that means heaven for you personally, more than anything else it means for you personally, is this. Whenever we observe within our sphere of influence, either internally or externally, a part of the unified field that is struggling or suffering in some way, and it is within our power to help, we do so. And we will absolutely do it for selfish reasons, because above all things, you and I, as individuals, long for optimal coherency for ourselves. I have talked about coherency at the levels of 5-watt lights and lasers and cars. The human system, in terms of complexity, is so very far away from that simpler level. Do you know what the quality of elevated human coherency feels like, and how many times you've tasted it in your life so far? Think of those times, if you've ever had them, when it just seemed like you were happy to see pretty much everything and everybody you met, and they were consistently happy to see you. Are there any moments of your life that you can remember when it felt like this was the case? If there are, then they will be golden memories. The quality of that level of coherency is the stuff of which dreams are made. It is what you long for, even if you would express it using different words. And you can be sure of this, because it's just maths. There's no elevated coherency for any value in existence that isn't just in love with the field, both internally and externally. That is just how it is. To try to duck that truth is to self-sabotage. Now it's been explained mathematically, objectively, we no longer need to go through any prolonged inquiries into whether we want to help the field when it is in need or not. We want to. For entirely selfish reasons, we want to. Stepping in to help where we can, with the discomfort or pain around us, or inside us, the harmonic consequences of that go beyond our ability to calculate. But we can be mathematically certain that they are harmonic. Stepping in to help is actually an acquired skill and not something one wants to be obtuse about. But what matters culturally is that the imperative is there. It is only what all of the surviving indigenous cultures learned long ago. We see the field in pain, we do what we can. It's no biggie, and it's also utterly foundational to any kind of elevated quality of life. It really is this simple. When we recognize and support the living unified field as a member of our own family, which it most assuredly is, the living unified field can better recognize and support us and harmonic coherency increases enormously. So let us build that one cultural imperative into the culture of our own individual personality, our business, our work, our play, our government, our bureaucracy, our relationships with everything, and most especially our relationships with ourselves. We make that one cultural imperative our automatic, unthinking default on an intimately personal level and on all levels of the human collective. In wielding it, in selfishly supporting everybody and everything that we encounter that needs our support, we lead ourselves towards coherences we have not experienced before. And that is when we learn that our imaginings of what pure heaven might feel like never came anywhere near the reality. In the next part, I will present my conclusions so far. My conclusion is that this video trilogy is the most momentous event in human history to date, bar none. Indeed, the momentousness of this event has felt like a burden to me, because after writing the scripts for this particular section several times, I realize I don't have the words to express its magnitude. I don't think the problem is with my ability with words. I think the difficulty is that the words simply don't exist. What comes relatively easy to me is seeing deep simplicity, and I sometimes underestimate how difficult seeing simplicity can be for most other people. And my words simply run out, because there's nothing they can do about it. Broadly speaking, we the human race have only ever conceived of two options to choose from when it comes to explaining the existence of existence. The first option is the one we have had for the longest time. It is the supernatural or spiritual or non-physical option of God or gods. This explanation can be summarized as: there is a very good explanation for the existence of existence, but it is one that cannot be perceived physically, and so cannot be fully comprehended by a human mind. And so, non-physical truth is considered to be real, but also unknowable by a physical human being. And so, the wise and sane acceptance of this is known as faith. The second option is relatively modern and is known as science, or more specifically, physics. Physics says that the human mind can potentially understand existence once physics is understood well enough. Non-physical truth is not accepted as being real, only abstract. Why is it that these two options have been pretty much the only two options we have so far been able to conceive of? It's because we feel we can understand the physical, and possibly one day even might. and that as physical beings we can't understand the non-physical, even though we intuitively sense non-physical phenomena at work. Option 1 allows for a truth that can be real and whole, but cannot be known by a human mind. Option 2 allows for a truth that can be known by a human mind, but which does not recognize as real anything that is not physical. These videos are entirely about providing us with a third option, that non-physical truth is both real and knowable. For those of you who have watched these videos right through to here and do not find anything of value in them, I have this to say. Thanks for watching it all. I really appreciate it. I hope you're having a lovely day. For those of you who have watched and are now truly as excited as I am about what this means for the whole of humanity, and indeed the entire planet, I have this to say. Try to calm down. Breathe. Relax. Try not to explode with joy, because we'd miss you if you did. For those of you who are somewhere in between, not quite willing to dismiss these videos entirely, but also not quite ready to explode with joy either, I'd like to suggest that the following statement encapsulates the foundation of my foundational theory. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. It all comes down to the first half of that statement. There are truths that cannot not be true. These are the objective truths that I have been referring to incessantly. I'd like to suggest that this is the ultimate statement that this theory rests on, and that if you can be convinced that this statement is incorrect, then you can be confident that my theory is broken and you can safely disregard it. Subjective truths can be true sometimes and in some places, while they can also be untrue sometimes and in some places. Objective truths are true everywhere and every when, because they just can't not be. Convince yourself that there is no such thing as an objective truth, according to that definition, and you can safely disregard this theory and get on with your day. If, however, you do come to the conclusion that there are such things as truths that cannot not be true, then you now understand how something as non-physical as a simple or complex objective truth can be asserting itself at all times in all places. You now understand how and where to study non-physical phenomena, and this is the greatest cognitive breakthrough in human history to date. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. The objective truths that have now introduced themselves to us via these videos. They may seem like cold and abstract concepts to you, because language use can be a rabbit hole of misdirection and misconception. These objective truths that have now introduced themselves to us are what you are made out of, from the heavy substances of your body to the depths of your consciousness and emotions. The objective truths are living, breathing truths, because all of them occupy all of space and all of time simultaneously, as only infinite arrays of non-physical phenomena can. If you are one of the ones who can see why these humble videos are a tectonic upheaval of unprecedented magnitude, I encourage you to take some time out. Get out somewhere where there are plants and trees and sky, and take a breath. Take a little pause. Let the world around you be what it is for a spell, and give yourself a chance to assimilate this shift of cognitive bias. It can only be an intimately personal process for each of us. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. If you are keen to shift your cognitive bias from the broken to the true, this statement encapsulates it well. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. If you are keen to defend and protect the broken cognitive bias, because it feels as though it has protected you in the past, then this statement is the one for you to debunk. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. This is the core message, the new information that these videos bring. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. This message may be difficult, even painful, for the religious and scientific alike. It may be difficult for the religiously dedicated because those truths that cannot not be true were never written or designed in advance. They are simply truths that never could have not been true. It could be painful for the scientifically dedicated because truths are non-physical. Truths that cannot not be true are not physical objects in and of themselves, just as space is not a physical object and time is not a physical object. Nevertheless, there are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is. These truths are the cause and the source of everything that we are and everything that we experience. These non-physical truths are where foundational understanding is to be found. Our current scientific thinking looks towards quantum mechanics in the hope of finding foundational understanding. Quantum mechanics is the study of the smallest bits of physicality that we are currently able to find. The rationale for this seems eminently reasonable. If we wish to discover the simplest, most foundational interactions in the natural world, where else would we look but at the smallest interactions in the natural world? Smaller can only mean simpler, can it not? No. This is currently the greatest, most devastating misconception in science, for the following reason. The quantum realm is, and can only be, a level of reality that is at both a higher resolution than the human scale and a higher speed of iteration than the human scale. Higher resolution and higher speed equals greater complexity, not lesser. Higher resolution and higher speed equals greater complexity, not lesser. We will not find foundational interactions, foundational simplicity, by looking at the most complex level of reality we can find. We will not find foundational interactions, foundational simplicity, by looking at the most complex level of reality we can find. And the remarkable levels of mystification that arise from the study of quantum mechanics are celebrated endlessly, even as they only confirm this. The difficulty for scientists who are interested in foundational understanding is that they can't think of anywhere else to look. We can't think of anywhere else to look. It's the difficulty of knowing how to study non-physical phenomena when one doesn't actually believe in it. The difficulty of that task, the task of capturing ultimate foundational simplicity, is accepted as great. It is one of the great challenges in science and philosophy. This is why these videos are so sorely needed right now. Before these videos, we had no idea of how to study foundational non-physical phenomena. And now we do. Now we have a place to go to study foundational non-physical simplicity. A place that is not the most complex level of existence we are able to perceive. I cannot express the magnitude of this. So, I'm not going to try. I'm ending this video now and leaving all of this with all of you. All of you with your many hands and your many eyes and your many ears and your many voices. This knowledge is not for me to hold. It is for us to have. It is for us to know, and it is for us to make the best use of that we can and do something good with. There are truths that cannot not be true, and so existence is as it is.